What is up, all my little spirits? So, after yesterday's video, which was definitely a lot more on the gloomier side, I figured today, instead of the video that I originally planned on uploading this week, I'd do something a little more hopeful, a little happier, just something that's not going to be as negative and critical. So, with the fall coming in, we are approaching year end season. And what exactly is that? There's no real definition because it's more of a fan made term, but the general consensus is that it's the time frame between November 1st and January 31st when mashup artists release their year end megamixes. And now that's the middle of October. That means year end season is right around the corner. With that in mind, I decided to look at something because of something that had me a little nervous over the summer. For those of you who weren't paying attention to this, which I'm sure is everyone because I think I'm the only one who's weird enough to be thinking about this, there are only about like 15 to 20 summer megamixes released this year, and a lot of prominent mashup artists in the community didn't upload summer megamixes that normally do. Whereas the year before, I think it was somewhere between like 20 to 40 were uploaded, so about double. So that got me a little concerned as far as what's going to happen during year end season. Are people going to be uploading? What's going to happen? And I have spoken to a lot of other mashup creators about why they did or didn't upload summer mega mixes, why it took some people so long. It seems like there were two general trains of thought as to what were driving people in the direction of not uploading one. The first and most prominent is just time restraints. People are trying to get back to work, live more of a fuller life, especially after the last years really made that harder. So, because of all that, they didn't want to devote as much time into making megamixes as they may have in prior years. And then, secondly, is just a lack of inspiration from the music that's been released this year. Like, if you look at the charts, Blinding Lights by The Weeknd, which technically was released in 2019, was still charting through a good portion of 2021. And then also Dua Lipa's song Levitating just refuses to leave the charts no matter what. That song is hanging in there. So between just people not having the time to work on mega mixes and just not feeling like there's a lot of new music to be working with, especially because a lot of the music this year that's been popular has been pretty mellow, laid back. That doesn't mean it's bad in any way, but nothing really upbeat, poppy, summery, etc. So, kind of hard to be in the mood to make a summer mega mix when a lot of the popular songs at the time feel very like autumn, winter, and spring oriented as opposed to summer sort of oriented. So I was a little concerned about what will happen with year end season, and I think what's going to happen is we're going to see a new generation of mashup artists rise up to the occasion, whereas a lot of other ones have been, I don't want to say shying away from making mashups, but been putting it on the back burner, sort of what I've been doing with my channel. So yeah, because I think that we're getting a new generation, that means there have to be older generations. So I decided to break up all mashup artists into one of four generations, with the fourth one starting this year. Oh yeah, also a disclaimer, even though it's the middle of October, I started writing the script for this in September. So what I base this on is what information was readily available to me. So some YouTube channels such as DJ Pyromania and Holocron have been removed from the platform, being YouTube. So it's harder to incorporate channels like that because I can't look at their channels and see when they started. So some channels will be omitted just because I don't have the data to include them, if that makes sense. And then, quick disclaimer, nothing said in this video is supposed to be negative towards anyone. I'm not hating on any mashup artists. If I didn't include someone, that's because there are so many. It's so easy to forget people. So take this with a grain of salt. Like, please don't think that if I don't include someone or if I give some sort of criticism about either a style of mashup making or about a particular mashup, that means I have any sort of negative feelings or resentment against that particular mashup artist. This is all just constructive, so don't read into anything more so that needs to be done. And since there's no like solid defined generations for mashup artists, that meant I had to come up with my own, and I had to think about what sort of categorize different people into their respective generations and where I would see breaking points between them that really saw a shift in how mashups were made. So here's the breakdown as to what I think defines each generation. And as I talk about each one, I'll have names of different mashup artists that I consider to be a part of that generation, because if I listed all of them, we would be here for the next week just watching this one video. So, names will be on screen, links will be in description for all the channels that I mentioned, so you can check them out. Okay, so let's start off with the first generation of mashup artists. I define this generation as anyone who started to make mashups on YouTube. And let me get this out of the way right now. When I refer to mashups, I'm referring to year-end megamixes specifically. So no one versus one mashups, no remixes, no edits. This is year-end specific. So you could have been making mashups since like before the year 2000, but if you didn't release your first year-end megamix until like 2015, you're not going to be incorporated into the first generation, if that makes any sense. So yeah, the first generation is pretty much anyone who made year-end megamixes prior to 2013, and then some continue to do so, some didn't. What I found to be common trends amongst these mashup artists is, one, typically they would keep their mashups on the shorter side, below 10 minutes in terms of length, and in terms of song amount, they would usually stick to around 50 maximum. As far as video editing goes, a lot of these mashup artists, I don't want to say they were lazy in their editing skills, but they wouldn't devote as much time and thought as you see these days. Usually just be, if you hear a song, you're going to see the music video for that song. There wouldn't be any sort of special effects or music video combinations to show that some music videos may have been similar, unless the two songs were put together in the actual mashup. But yeah, despite the fact that the first generation typically was a bit more minimalist in how many songs they use, the length of their mashups, and how they approach video editing, if it weren't for them, year-end megamixes wouldn't be where they are today. They really paved the way, and I don't take that term lightly, because a certain fan base that I am a part of uses that term a little bit in excess, in my opinion. They really made that mashups weren't seen as a novelty and are actually a solidified part of the YouTube platform. And a key person to mention is DJ Earworm, who we'll talk about him even more in excess in a bit. He is actually the person responsible for, I want to say it was 2014's YouTube Rewind audio, so just goes to prove that people from this first generation, they really solidified mashup artists in the scope of YouTube and put us on the map. This first generation also laid down the groundworks for two of what I consider being three mashup archetypes. The first one is the DJ earworm archetype, which is more so lyrically or thematically based. Basically, the way that these work is either A, all the songs are supposed to kind of form sentences amongst the lyrics with each other, or it's going to be more so that the lyrics of the songs all fit into a certain theme, and because of that sort of cohesion and synergy, they still work together in that respect. So sometimes they'll make sense lyrically, sometimes the lyrics won't make sense, but because of the theme, you still feel like you're listening to an original song as opposed to a mashup of X amount of different songs thrown together. The good thing about this type of structure is actually gives the mashup more structure. You don't need to worry about each individual segment as opposed to the other archetype, which is the Daniel Kim or popped anthology archetype. This one focuses more so on a continuously changing mashup where you typically don't go back and revisit songs or sounds later on in the mashup. You hear the song, you hear the a cappella or the instrumental, and that is that. It does not get further explored later on in the mashup. Whereas with the DJ earworm archetype, not only will songs be repeated in the sort of chorus section, they can also be repeated throughout the other parts, the verses and bridge of the mashup itself. The sort of give and take with these is that with the DJ earworm concept, typically it's expected that the chorus piece, the part that repeats a few times, that's going to be the strongest part of your mashup. If the other parts in between the intro, outro, and the in-between segments aren't as strong, it's not the end of the world because going into it like you would any other song, you expect the chorus or the hook to be what drives you to want to listen to the song more. The verses and bridge should still be good, but they don't necessarily have to be the selling point for the song. Whereas with the popped anthology version of the mashup, because there isn't this expectation that one part's going to be better than the others, they all need to be equally as strong as each other. And that can be dealt in a number of ways. You could have more of a sort of laid back mashup where none of the sections are really that sort of bombastic, for lack of a better term, and it just kind of just flows, brings you through the motions. You could have it that like the whole thing is completely up to par on a higher scale. Or sometimes what will happen is some segments will be stronger than others. Typically, if you want to go with that other one where some segments are going to shine more than others, what you want is for the introduction to be really strong, the ending to be strong, and maybe one or two sections in the middle that are also strong, and then the ones that are going to be either intentionally weaker or just happen to be weaker, those are more so your transition sections that are supposed to help flow the mashup between those stronger ones. Unfortunately, sometimes people do it where they won't act as transition sections and they'll just come off as weaker. So that's sort of the biggest downfall about the popped anthology Daniel Kim style is sometimes your mashup can feel lackluster if not everything is up to par. But because of the lack of structure that the DJ earworm part has, you have a lot more creative freedom. Whereas with the DJ earworm version, because it acts more like a conventional song with that repetition in the chorus, you have to be very careful because if you just repeat the same thing again and again and again, it can become a little boring and predictable. One of my favorite examples of this not happening is DJ Earworm's 2014 year in Megamix, where even though the a cappella remains the same in the chorus, he changes up the instrumental every time, so you don't know what to expect. And that's such a powerful strategy to utilize. So yeah, so that pretty much sums up the first generation of mashup artists. Moving on to the second generation, I decided that these are people who their first year in Megamix was released between the years of 2013 and 2015. I'll explain why 2015 was the last year when we get to the third generation, but why is 2013 the first year? I think Daniel Kim's 2012 popped anthology really resonated with a lot of people. It went viral and got people interested in mashups. And there's this video of this high school where all of the classmates were lip syncing along to the song. Every time it switched to an acapella, a different person would come in. Like, it was very creatively done, in my opinion. They went around the whole school. It was really fun. I didn't participate in it, but it was fun to watch. That's what I mean. And I think because of that particular mashup, it really inspired a lot of people to start making year-end mega mixes, and people, including myself, did so. There was a huge influx in 2013 of year-end mega mix creators. Some defining features of the second generation of Megamix artists is typically they'd be a little more willing to add more songs and increase the runtime of their videos. So whereas with the first generation, I'd say the average runtime was closer to like 7 minutes, with the second generation, typically it would be closer to that like 10-11 minute mark. We also saw a huge increase in how many songs were incorporated. Usually the first generation would focus on like the top 50 biggest songs of the year, whereas the second generation would include closer to 100. And not only would it not just focus solely on songs that performed well chart-wise throughout the year, it would also be songs that were popular in terms of internet relevancy or streaming, music video views. There would be a few more factors incorporated into what songs were included. And what I think was actually most important was personal taste. When it came to the first generation of mashup artists, because there wasn't that much competition per se, I'm not saying we're in a competition with each other, but there weren't that many people to compare to each other. It was a little easier to stand out on your own. Once the second generation of mashup artists came around, it was a lot harder to diversify yourself from the group because now there are so many other people, and a lot of them were more so focused on the Daniel Kim type style as opposed to the DJ Earworm style, meaning there's a good chance that there'd be a lot of overlap in how people structured their mashups, what song combinations they used, what were you going to do to make that you stood out. And because everyone has slightly different taste, we saw different artists being incorporated. So you'd have your mainstream artists, your Beyonce, Drake, Rihanna, Bruno Mars, Nicki Minaj, Lady Gaga, Taylor Swift, Katy Perry, Justin Bieber, etc. in pretty much everyone's. But then you'd also see some lesser known artists, and this is especially true amongst EDM music. That started making a huge surge in popularity amongst mashup artists during this generation. And then we also saw a little bit more creativity when it came to video editing with this generation. I will give credit where credit is due. The first generation mashup artists, they also started to become a lot more creative in how they edited their videos as well. So now everyone brought that up a bar. And then we have one individual in particular who set the bar above everyone else and created his own style of mashups, bringing us to the third archetype, the Andy Wu archetype or style of mashup making. Basically, what Andy did that I had never experienced before with his 2014 year-end Megamix, which holds a very special place in my heart, is he was able to utilize the music in a way that moved me. And By that, I mean like more so emotionally just like tugged at my heartstrings with his final section, utilizing the song Unconditionally by Katy Perry, which, because of this Megamix, is my favorite song of all time. Fun fact. Second favorite, as of recently, has been Psycho by Red Velvet. If you guys haven't picked up on that by now, I'm so sorry, but where you been? But yeah, so as far as mashups go, Andy really started to figure out how to utilize both the sonics and the music video itself in order to really push mashups to another level that I had never seen previously. And then in the following year, 2015, he releases Megamix Fight for Love, which introduced the chapter style of mashup creation. Personally, I'm not the hugest fan or biggest fan or giganteest fan or... Is it obvious that I'm a STEM major yet, not an English major? Basically, I don't enjoy the chapter style as much as the Daniel Kim style because that one usually feels a lot more fluid, whereas the chapter style, if your transitions aren't on point, they can feel very abrupt at times. And transitions are definitely the hardest part in a mashup because you can't just have one running BPM, which is the rate in which songs are played, and one running key and chord progression, which is how songs are structured in terms of the notes and the melodies that they use, because then some will be sped up too fast, slow down too much, the quality of the audio will be too changed, it will sound very low if the key is switched too much, which can be a hindrance when it comes to the DJ earworm style of mashup making if you have to make those extreme changes, whereas with the Daniel Kim style and the Andy Wu style, you have a little more liberty to keep them more so on par with where they were originally, the songs. But yeah, if the transitions between sections to accommodate for the fact that all the songs are different aren't very strong, the mashup can feel very segmented and not like one cohesive piece, which is why I sometimes don't like the chapter style as much. Depends on the mashup. Some have been really amazing, and some I think drop the ball in certain areas. But yeah, so we got introduced to this style of mashup making, and Andy Wu, I believe, is one of the first, if not the first person, to really utilize special effects in their video editing. And this is mashup artists specifically. A good friend of mine, Panos T, makes amazing video edits. I think he may have been doing so before Andy in terms of effects and such, but he unfortunately doesn't make mashups himself, so he's not being included. I'm still going to throw a link to his channel in the description, so be sure to check him out. But yeah, so whereas the first generation of mashup artists were sort of the pioneers of the genre, the second generation, that was where the trendsetters came in. And then finally, we're moving on to the third generation. These are who I consider to be the revolutionists. They took pretty much everything that the first two generations laid down. They extracted what was good and perfected that, and then everything else they completely rejected. This is the generation that really shook things up, and it started in 2016. So, I mentioned the first generation ended and the second began in 2013 because of an influx of mashup creators based on what I believe Daniel Kim's 2012 year end deserves a lot of credit for. 2016, we also saw a big influx. I don't think, though, that a specific mashup or creator was responsible. I think it has to do more so with the nature of what music was present during that year. So like I mentioned earlier, there is this thing called a BPM, which stands for beats per minute. And that refers to basically the rate or how fast a song is played. When songs are in a very similar or the same BPM, then it's much easier to mash them together, and therefore it's easier to make them sound good together without one being sped up too much or slowed down too much again. In 2016, a majority of the songs fit between the range of about 90 beats per minute and 110 beats per minute. And when there's not that much of a discrepancy between songs in terms of how fast or slow they are, it's much easier to make mashups, especially for beginners, because that gives you a lot more creative freedom. And I think the third generation took advantage of that because, like I mentioned with the second generation, how do you distinguish yourself from others? With the third generation, because so many songs were so similar, it was easier to make different combinations so that way you could distinguish yourself from everyone else, even if you were all using the exact same song list. Speaking of which, the third generation is where we really saw a big explosion of songs that weren't just mainstream Western US pop music. This is the generation that really introduced Latin pop, K-pop, alternative music, genres like that into mashup making. And that really set them aside from the prior generations because they were still focusing more so on what was doing well, either on the charts, getting YouTube video views, stuff like that, that made them popular. The third generation mashup artists, they weren't afraid to experiment with lesser known songs and artists and use a lot of them. So this generation, they would average about 150 songs per mashup. As of recently, numbers like 200 and 300 are becoming much more prominent. And the length of their mashups has been increasing to, I'd say the average is about 13 minutes. Some have been closer to like 15, 16. And they're just getting bigger and bigger. So this generation really said, we don't care about just focusing on popular stuff. We don't care about only using this amount of time. We are going to have our mashup go as long as we want, be able to really flesh out every song, let it shine, use as many songs as we want, give them all the spotlight, and just go for it. We don't care about what genre they're from, what artist they're from, what language they're in. Like, this generation really just took the reins with things and did a 180 in the opposite direction. So yeah, and then that brings us to the fourth generation of mashup artists. So I don't see a big influx in mashup artists coming in this year. What I see is actually a lot of mashup artists are leaving mashups behind. And what do I mean by that? We have prominent figures like Daniel Kim, who stopped making mashups after 2015, unless you want to include like his decade end. If you know what, that is for a different video. We're going to keep things positive today. He has been focusing more so on his family. You have people like DJ Earworm, Andy Wu, Top 10 Music Official. I don't want to be critical and negative about them because I do love their work, but it's been obvious in the last few years that they haven't been prioritizing mashup making, especially with things like Top 10 Music Officials. Summer and year-end megamixes usually sound almost identical, with the year-end one only having a couple extra sections added in. Andy has been later and later in terms of the date in which he releases his year-end megamix. And DJ Earworm's megamixes, just sometimes they don't feel like they have the same heart and soul that they did from his earlier works. And the reason why is because these people are growing up. All of us are. We're finding different hobbies, different types of videos we enjoy making, having to actually work more of an occupation type job, which requires more hours. People are going off to college, like Adam Music has been doing so and working more. So like the first and second generation of mashup artists, they're growing up and they're moving on. And then the third generation, we have some people who are going to go to college soon. So again, they're growing up, they're moving on. So I think instead of an influx, we're just going to see less people who were making mashups release this year. And that's going to change things up. I think something in my gut is telling me that with how many people don't see the music as that we've been having that's been popular as enjoyable or inspirational, there's going to be a new generation popping up this year. Because if the music's popular, there's got to be a reason for it, right? And with mashups becoming popular on the app TikTok, I feel like that combined with this new generation that's going to be able to better utilize the music that the rest of us are like, oh, the music today is trash, it's uninspired, it's lackluster, boring, yada, 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 Debbie Downer. I think this younger generation that we're about to see, which is typically middle and high school age individuals, they are going to thrive this year, and we're going to see a new renaissance of mashups come out. So yeah, those are basically the 4 generations of mashup artists, and I'm honestly really looking forward to seeing what people deliver on in this upcoming year. There are some creators who I have a lot of high hopes for in terms of what they release. First of all, Joseph James, one of my closest friends. Like, trust me, guys, when I say his year in Megamix is coming along great and it's going to be amazing, just trust me on that, okay? And then after last year, Nickness, who originally I think went by NMGH mashups or something along that line, he really stepped up his game in 2020. I feel like I'm going to be so blown away this year. And then we also have the mashup artist Normal Smasher, who focuses on K-pop specific mashups. Seeing their improvement from 2019 to 2020 alone, I'm so excited to see what they have in store for 2021, because as someone who's also working on a K-pop specific Megamix for this year end, I'm working on 2, one that's going to be general pop and one that's K-pop. I don't know why I hate myself so much, but we'll see. There's been a lot of great songs that have come up this year from K-pop specifically, so just with the materials they have available to work with alone makes me so excited to see what they come up with. But yeah, so I'm excited for this year's year-end season. I think we are going to see a new group of mashup artists really rise to the occasion where a lot of the rest of us have been not as inspired recently. And they're going to shake things up again, just like the 2nd generation did, and just like the 3rd generation did. So let me know, who are your favorite mashup artists? I'm actually planning on making a video about which mashup artists you should subscribe to based on your taste in music and other things that is in the works. I don't know how long it's going to take because there are a lot of mashup artists to go through, but yeah. So yeah, if you like this type of content on my channel, like, subscribe, comment, let me know if you want me to make more videos like this pertaining to mashups in general, if you just want me to shut up and just make mashups instead of procrastinating, which I have been doing a little bit, but let me know what you guys want to see from here. And as far as my year in Megamix goes, I'm going to put another community tab post up to remind you guys if there are any songs you want to see specifically, either in my general year in Megamix, which is just going to be anything that was mainstream pop in pretty much Western music, including Latin pop, as well as K-pop music videos that hit 200 million views. I think that's all I'm including. And then also any K-pop songs from late 2020 that I didn't include last year, like I Can't Stop Me by Twice. So that's going to be my general mainstream year in Megamix. And then my K-pop one is anything released in K-pop from January 1st of this year to present day. So not only don't just tell me what songs you want me to include, let me know which Megamix they actually fit into based on the criteria, just organizational sake on my part. Now that Adele has finally released her new song, and I don't think BTS is going to release any more surprises, fingers crossed, because I love them, but guys, stop releasing new music. Because, yeah, that delays a lot of other projects I've been working on, but yeah. I'm finally able to start working on my first year in Megamix, which is the general one, so let me know what songs you want me to use. Until next time, like, comment, subscribe. I already said that, I don't care, and peace out.